Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Peter. I'm going to read my paper, and the reason I'm going to read it is when I speak casually with PowerPoints, I suck. And when I read a paper, then there are ideas in it, and I can communicate those ideas. I want to say, I'm speaking as someone who's trying to do this at another university. We've held two very large conferences with about 200 people in the room, just like this at Rice, called Archives of the Impossible. And those conferences are based on an actual archive, which was started by none other than Jacques Vallée, who's been celebrated here. And this was also my introduction to you, Gary, believe it or not. It was about 2014, and Jacques picked me up in Berkeley and was taking me to an airport and asked me for help placing his papers and his files in an archive. And that was the beginning, really, of our collection. Since then, Whitley Strieber gave us about 5,000 letters that came out of the communion experience or the communion affair in the 80s and 90s. Diana Pasulka has helped us. Leslie Kane has helped us. We have John Mack's papers there now. So there's a lot of major figures in the archive, and we're trying to do this at Rice, but I think in terms of Jacques' paper, we're sort of in the categories 5, 6, and 7. We're doing the weird and the strange at Rice. And I think we're trying to do the science and the public policy here, which is a different project, but I hope they're complementary. All right, so here goes. I'm going to start off with a couple selections, actually from Jacques' journals. This is from volume 2 and from volume 4. The first is a quote from Aimé Michel, a French researcher, probably writing this sometime in the 1960s. He writes, ufology is not a science, but a process of initiation. One starts with field investigations and ends up studying Arab mystics. This next quote is from volume 4, somewhere in the 1990s, and the here refers to Spring Hill Observatory and Library that Jacques had built. He writes, my view of the phenomenon has evolved here beyond classical physical and biological parameters to a reality in multiple layers. It melds the pre-existing grid of its logic with the consciousness of the observer, manifesting a display of arbitrary complexity. Okay? That's the weird part. All right, here goes the paper. I know we are tired. I hope I can do something helpful and hopeful here at the end. An accent, perhaps, or a caution, perhaps even a superhuman future or two. I want to begin by defining my perspective, since it blinds me to some things, especially technological possibilities, even as it brings other things into sharp focus, especially religious or spiritual possibilities. One cannot see a star through a microscope, and one cannot see a cell through a telescope. The lenses through which we see are focusing and limiting at the same time. Put differently, both the telescope and the microscope possess lenses that are intentionally distorted so that we can see at a particular level for specific purposes. So too with our professional frameworks. They are distortions of the lenses, but these disciplinary foci are also very helpful, and in fact they are necessary to see anything at all. What I will say today is a kind of massive hunch or overwhelming intuition based on reading thousands of pages of books and archival materials and engaging in hundreds of hours of conversations with experiencers and researchers from the natural sciences, the social sciences, the humanities, and the arts. I come to this practice through the history of religions, a discipline that concerns itself with humanity's religious experience from the prehistoric cave paintings of Europe to today's near-death or abduction experience, with a special focus on altered states of consciousness. It is out of this historical, comparative, and altered perspective that I will speak of what Peter Skafish calls signs that are given off by the X of the UFO. X indeed. Signs indeed. I have 6 things to say. I will stick to the first 3 for the sake of time. The fuller statement is the full paper, which I'm happy to share with you. And my joke will be, if you ask me anything, I'll say, oh, that's in the paper. This is just really it's just a slice through what I want to say. The first thing I want to say is it's about scale. Okay? It's about scale. The first thing I want to say is that the signs of the UFO extend over immense ranges of space and time. Certainly across the entire globe and throughout that tiny slice of memory that we call human history. Any individual contact or abduction experience in the contemporary world is a mere moment in this larger super presence. We can only intuit something of its hyperpresence from a larger perspective, at once comparative and historical. A number of corollaries follow. One is that no single individual can fathom this thing. This is why I so believe in the university and a kind of intergenerational project. The other thing is that no nation state or cultural identity can fathom what's at work as well. The UFO, after all, does not appear to be restricted to any local politics or airspace. Our borders mean nothing to it. This rather obvious fact need not be bad news. It may, in fact, be very good news. This relegation of our present national identities to a secondary status, even a potential irrelevance, is, after all, very much a piece with the UFO's consistent concerns over ecological collapse, nuclear armament, and dystopian apocalypse. Still, public policies are important as working political responses. What we desperately need is moral, scientific, and frankly spiritual leadership beyond our present borders and boundaries. The U.S. is poised to provide some leadership here, but only if it can embrace its rich, combinative logic with respect to religion. No religion gets to speak for the whole, and religious freedom guarantees new combinations and spiritual experiments. It is also important to affirm the immigrant or alien nature of the U.S. Remember, the alien was used for the immigrant, still is, I suppose. And both acknowledge and mourn, not celebrate and memorialize our colonizing and enslaving pasts. And I don't say this for arbitrary reasons. In fact, a kind of post-colonial lens has been part of the UAP or UFO phenomena since at least Charles Ford in the 1920s, who saw very clearly that these things floating in the sky looked a lot like ships floating in the harbor that the Native Americans had no idea what was in store for them. So there was a kind of colonial sensibility there. And my African American colleagues point out to me constantly that strange ships showing up and abducting people is not unique to the UFO phenomenon. Okay, so there's a kind of history to this that I think we really need to remember and think through. One can often detect something of this multifaceted leadership in the experiencers themselves. I take it as significant, for example, that one of our most recent experiencers, Matthew Roberts, the U.S. naval service member who was stationed on the USS Theodore Roosevelt for the 2015 Go Fast radar video, and later transferred to the Office of Naval Intelligence, understands the phenomena to be fundamentally initiatory in its dynamics and spiritual in nature, whose aim is a kind of unconditional love for all human beings, regardless of national politics, ethnicity, or religion. This is the sort of leadership I'm talking about. I fully understand that the vast majority of individuals are not ready for this type of flip into who they are before and beyond their constructed identities. There is an understatement. I understand that most people think that they are their psychological, national, and religious egos, their surface selves. This is probably the deepest provocation of the UFO. its utter disregard for our constructed local egos and the degree to which it overcomes them. There is immense potential here, but only if we are willing to surrender these same righteous selves and create new public policy that constitutes a more humane and global worldview. Number two, it's about technology. The second thing I want to observe is that the UFO has taken on special urgency because of our human technology. With new advances in radar, sonar, and satellite capabilities, we are seeing what was probably always there in the environment, but was generally invisible. Put more bluntly, these things are not new, but our abilities to see them are. It also needs to be said, many of our present global crises around ecological degradation and nuclear holocaust are precisely because of our sciences and technologies. I do not think it is an accident at all that the UFO shows such anxious interest in our nuclear installations. So the statement "it's about technology" is doubly meant, or triply. The total UFO event, after all, seems to possess both a material or physical and a mental or spiritual dimension. The UFO clearly violates our present way of dividing reality up into mind and matter. I continue to think that this fundamental non-duality is its ultimate power and provocation. Any discussion of technology, then, should take into account this fundamental both-and. I should also add here that our present realizations around AI will have a major impact on our ability to understand the UFO itself, which has for decades now included descriptions of the robotic ways that the beings are said to move or interact with humans. In other words, there's been AI and abduction accounts for decades. It's not a recent thing. But I think our ability to see it and to talk about it is fairly recent. Put a bit differently, AI gives us a new way of imagining and picturing what may have been going on all along. The present case of the UFO can be compared in some ways to the modern near-death experience, which is also heavily dependent on recent biomedical technology. The phrase near-death experience dates to 1975. It's very recent, and it's definitely because of biomedical technology. People are being brought back from much further into the death process. As a consequence, they are remembering more, and so they are saying more. One result is a new genre of literature of still unrealized potential that implies, but never quite theorizes, different types of bodies: physical bodies that die, and subtle or super bodies that do not. Another collapse of the mind-matter assumptions that we keep making. The UFO and near-death experience, then, are in some sense unintended but quite real consequences of modern human technology. To be more precise, the two related phenomena cannot be reduced to the technologies, but they also cannot be experienced on a broad level without them. Okay, number three, it's about religion. This is my bigger point, really. It's what I have the most to say about. Which brings me now to my third point. The history of religions can be very helpful, but also very misleading with respect to the UFO. Religion is the elephant in the living room, obviously. This rather obvious fact is dismissed under the intellectual cop-out that is woo. To the extent that we use this word and what it represents, we cannot grasp what is at stake, what these events mean or portend. This does not mean that religion is our answer. I am not saying that. I am saying something doubled. Allow me to explain this doubleness. First of all, the history of religions is very helpful to the extent that the religions give powerful and consistent witness to something transcendent to our ordinary human experience, something other, with a capital O, than the social human or rational mind, and so potentially transformative of society and the self. Cosmologically speaking, in other words, the view of the universe, the religions commonly place this other in the sky, the heavens or the stars, which they often understand in physical terms, not metaphorical terms. The similarities to the UFO are obvious. I often joke about, quote, weird beings coming down from the sky and screwing with humans. That's called religion, unquote. The joke is meant as a joke. Thanks for laughing. Some of you did. But there is a comparative argument here. But we have to be very careful and precise about that comparative argument, and most people are not careful. They assume their own belief system, their own worldview, whatever that worldview happens to be, religious or secular. It should be stressed at this point that many of the prodigies of the religions have been very aware of the basic incommensurability of a non-human intelligence, and very adept at translation and mediation of what looks like a non-human or superhuman presence. In other words, this thing has been around as far as we can see back. There's really nothing particularly new about it. It should also be stressed, however, that these very translations by these religious adepts are often not accepted by the believing public. This is one reason the word mystical or mystikos means quite literally secret. It is not that there is some kind of whispered content that could be shared but is held back, some kind of power game. I have the secret and you don't. It is rather that this form of knowledge is simply not communicable unless the listener is ready, has the requisite experience, has ears to hear, as the ancient Jewish rabbi once said. As Nietzsche put the same matter, he called it esoteric, by the way, to get at the same idea. What will be heard in most such cases is nothing at all. The teaching will sound nonsensical, absurd, in a word, impossible. That is because that which is being spoken is impossible within the categories of the reigning order of knowledge. So there's a real clash here that I really want to stress that. I also think the physical aspects of the history of religions, especially what I want to call the physics of mystics, have been vastly underestimated in the present regime of knowledge, both in the humanities and the sciences. Human bodies in the history of religions do all sorts of superhuman things. They levitate, they bilocate, they know the physical future, and they experience different types of conscious energy, to name just a few. I was once asked to lecture, this is a true story, believe it or not. I was once asked to lecture at MIT by a former propulsion expert who worked in the classified division of a major aerospace corporation. The colleague asked me to talk about two things: human levitation and UFOs. He was totally serious. And there was a DARPA guy sitting right in the front row too. So I mean, this was like totally serious. So I did. I think they are indeed related in their anti-gravitational properties. People do levitate, they do fly, and they do so silently, inexplicably, almost always in altered states of consciousness. We have no way of understanding any of this in our present order of knowledge. It is simply impossible, and yet there it is. And if you don't believe me, I suggest a recent book that just came out called They Flew from Yale University Press. My point, that we have much to learn from what we already know, that is from the historical past, but we have to be very careful with that past, very suspicious. What we are often dealing with in the ufological materials is what Christian theology would call demonology, or in other more positive or transformative modes, angelology. Basically, entities that are not human beings, have different types of bodies, and are not God. Such entities have been given multiple interpretations in different religions. I really want to stress that. I'm not signing my name to the Christian interpretation. But the demonic beings in particular are generally seen as fairly low within the total ecology of the religions, even below the living human. This is as true in Hindu South Asia as it is in Christian Europe.
This does not mean that this is what such entities in fact are. I want to be really, really clear here. We also have to remember that both the soul and its double have been called demons by elite religious practitioners. The demon, or daimon, as they called it in Greek, is in fact an ancient figure of immense importance and nuance. Things are different today, but not that different. In the modern ufological literatures, for example, the entities are often considered to be future humans, an interpretation to which I am much drawn and actually find quite persuasive. Indeed, I happen to think that one of our big mistakes is that we are imagining the UFO in spatial terms. So we say things like, the distances are too great for interstellar travel. We are not considering a temporal imagination or a temporal focus here. These beings are from another time, not another star system. My point, though, is not to opt for a particular model, angels, aliens, or future humans. My point is that even within the religious traditions themselves, far above the demons or aliens and very much within the reach of living human beings, are the mystical experiences of unity, communion, emptiness, enlightenment, liberation, deification, and physical metamorphosis that are all understood to be the real purpose and goal of human life. We do not need to sign our names to any of these particular belief systems, but we should learn from their attempts at ordering the anomalies and affirming both the spiritual and physical nature of the beings involved. Many of the altered states of the history of religions, moreover, are inherently apophatic. That is, they say away, apophasis, what has been said or believed by the surrounding public or culture within the religious register, which generally understands the deity as an object or being that can be approached and engaged. Here we return to the basic non-duality of mind and matter I hinted at above. These apophatic experiences are non-translatable into sensory or rational means, which of course rely on this same subject-object structure. I think this is one of our most basic assumptions, that we're a subject looking at a collection of objects, much less mathematical or scientific ones. In a word, these experiences are incommensurable. Secrecy here, again, is not about content. It is about a kind of gnosis or deifying direct knowledge that is simply not transactional or communicable because it cannot be slotted into any subject-object structure. That's the good news. There's also some bad news. What we today call religion is also profoundly unhelpful in that it is usually not like this at all. It is not apophatic. Indeed, religion inevitably leads to all kinds of belief systems or interpretations. From a historical and comparative perspective, none of these systems can be exclusively true for the species as a whole. It is quite possible, of course, that they are all true in some kind of inclusive or pluralist kind of way. That is, it is possible that all of these belief systems give relative witness to a set of human responses to this superpresence. Such a comparative practice is embedded, for example, in the ancient Asian image of the 5 blind men and the elephant. In this case, literally in our living room. All 5 blind men feel a different part of the elephant: the trunk, the tusk, the leg, the ear, the tail. They all describe it completely differently, but it's the same elephant. No one is wrong. But no one is completely correct either. Right? But this is a very different kind of comparative argument and not one in favor of any particular religion or culture. It is also possible, by the way, that a pluralism may be more radical still, not a witness to a deeper unity or elephant, but to a fundamental plurality of being. Maybe what we think of as nature behaves differently in different cultural contexts because it really is different. Maybe nature is culturally conditioned. Maybe this is why people fly in some historical epochs and don't in others. That would be weird, but that's what it looks like. So yes, there is a deep connection between the history of religions and the UFO, but we cannot use our present assumptions about society, science, space exploration, and extraterrestrials to understand the past within a kind of presentism, as if our present worldview is somehow complete or infallible. Nor can we use the assumptions of the past about gods or God or angels or demons to understand the present. We have to be much more sophisticated than this kind of thinking, whichever way the arrow flies. There is simply no debate, for example, that the UFO is related to psychical, parapsychological, and paranormal phenomena. Serious researchers have been saying this for over half a century. How many times do we need to hear this before it becomes common knowledge? Perhaps the technology affects or projects the paranormal display, like some kind of movie projector. Perhaps these anomalies are expressions of consciousness itself. Perhaps consciousness itself is the projector. Perhaps, as I have argued for over a decade, such events show us in dramatic terms that there is no final separation between mind and matter. This could be good news if we can but accept our sciences for what they are and can do, and what they are not and cannot do, and then integrate those other intellectual disciplines like anthropology, philosophy, and the history of religions that have rich histories of theorizing consciousness or mind and its relationship to the physical world. Related here, and I'm going to close with this thought, but this is a big thought. Related here is the question of how the religions might react or respond to what is sometimes called disclosure. There appear to be two basic positions in the literature. We've heard them both. One position argues that the religions, more likely the religion of the author in question, can assimilate and integrate such disclosure. The other position argues that the religions are expressions of previous eras and forms of knowledge, not this one, and so they are incapable of the radical change that would be necessary. Hence, it is concluded the necessity of secrecy, or in some cases, gradual disclosure. Speaking such a secret out loud or all at once would spell the end of the religion. I confess I am more of the latter negative camp. I do not think that all religions can integrate the UFO, much less alien bodies. Although I understand and appreciate the former positive camp as well, perhaps I sit or wobble in the middle of the two. I suspect there is an important truth in both positions, and I would draw a distinction to explain my own waffling. I would say what I already said, namely that the religions are helpful in their insistence on translating or mediating a presence that is transcendent to the social human being, but that they are not helpful in the ways that they insist on particular belief systems, few of which could likely survive any kind of robust revelation of a species-wide cosmic condition. I suppose in the end it matters which religions or what kind of religion one is talking about and what constitutes disclosure. I think the question is complicated and not at all an either or. And I always joke here, I work and teach in Texas, okay? This is California, okay? It's very, very different in Texas, I assure you. The answers are different. But allow me two points here, and these are my last points. First, I cannot help but notice that many a religious believer will literally demonize parapsychological phenomena. Literally. UFOs are real, but they are demons. Mediumship is evil, and so on. I can explain to you what such people believe are the biblical roots of such beliefs or convictions, and why the biblical texts themselves are much more complicated and frankly much more interesting. But that is not my point. My point is that some religions literally demonize what we are trying to talk about. That takes the topic off the table. It does not keep it on the table. That's not helpful. Second, and very much related, I am quite concerned about what is sometimes called the psychedelic renaissance, a name given to the broad-based psychiatric and clinical study of psychoactive molecules in the US and Europe, and the pharmaceutical and legal transformations that are very much sought in their wake. This is very similar, actually, to the UFO disclosure discussion. Much as we see in the UFO phenomena, the altered states induced by such psychoactive plants often display a fairly clear animist structure. Plants and animals speak, paranormal powers manifest, insectoid entities appear, as do, by the way, aliens and UFOs. What concerns me here are two basic things. First, predictably, the wildest or strangest of the psychedelic states are actively ignored or not reported at all in the literature. Okay? Secondly, the history of European colonialism and monotheism with respect to psychoactive plants has been absolutely awful and often literally murderous. Has religion then welcomed the animist revelation of the plants? Absolutely not, okay? So let's be really careful here when we're thinking about this. The British writer Arthur C. Clarke wrote a science fiction novel many decades ago. He called it Childhood's End, 1953. He basically argued that full disclosure of an alien presence, even a friendly one, would render immediately irrelevant all religions on the planet, except, the book implied, Buddhism. This was, by the way, Clarke's religion. All right? This was the end of childhood. That is, the end of religion. I'm somewhat with the early Clarke here, although I'd seriously doubt that most Buddhist traditions can survive a fuller revelation either. I guess I am deeply skeptical that anything resembling what we now call religion or science can survive a truly non-human or superhuman intelligence. I think we are talking about a different kind of humanity here, a future one that has not yet appeared to us. Or maybe it has. Final comments. I like to tell jokes, as I think these jokes crystallize my intellectual arguments. Much as icebergs crystallize the ocean they float in, and in fact are in another frozen or crystallized form. People remember jokes too. They don't remember arguments. Sometimes, okay, often, no one laughs at my jokes, no doubt because the terms of the joke do not match their understanding of the world, and so can produce no sudden disjunction, shock, or what we call humor. In other words, I'm not funny, okay? I sometimes joke, for example, that the present concern with threats and national intelligence is fundamentally misguided. That, quote, they might as well be trying to shoot down souls, unquote. I then follow up with a challenge. Good luck with that. Does such a joke and challenge make any sense in our present order of knowledge? No, of course not. And that's my point. I think the joke is funny, but then I also feel very alone. Thank you all this weekend for making me feel a little less alone.